Samantha stifled a heavy sigh, her fingers digging into her temples as she sent up a silent prayer to all the saints she could think of, hoping they would somehow help her deal with that awkward, unkempt girl who always seemed to be laughing. She still shudders at the memory of that fateful day when everything went wrong. If only she had known what would come to pass, she would never have allowed her beloved son Tom to study information technology. It was all her brother's fault. That insufferable man suggested that smart kids pursued degrees in it, believing it would benefit her son to be surrounded by such company. Too bad the neighbor hadn't shown her what a typical IT specialist was like, complete with all the lowbrow humor that seemed to follow them. At first, the changes in Tom were subtle. Strange, unfamiliar words slipped into his vocabulary, which Samantha initially dismissed as professional jargon. But then that same neighbor, bless her heart, opened her eyes to the modern slang that was corrupting today's youth. How could anyone mangle their native language like that? Was this the result of her hard work as a professor's daughter, with a scientific degree and 2 higher educations? All those years spent raising and educating her only son seemed wasted now. She had put in so much effort, reading him classical literature, taking him to museums, exhibitions, the opera, and ballet. And now, he was determined to drive her to the grave, that unbearable boy. Things were made worse by the fact that the university was in another city, with her son living in a dormitory, where he faced daily exposure to the bad influence of his peers. At least she could take solace in the fact that there were no girls around. She could only imagine the kinds of flirts his new friends could introduce him to. Oh, poor unfortunate girl. If she had known who her beloved child would ultimately choose, she would have personally found him the most polished one. Anything but this. That was what she now called her daughter-in-law. Charlotte had turned Tom's head so completely that he married her, against his mother's wishes, during his 4th year. He had such a bright future ahead of him, but no. At first, she feared the girl might get pregnant, but now she doubted she would ever see grandchildren. It was unlikely this one could conceive at all. In Samantha's eyes, Charlotte was a peculiar blend of femininity and masculinity. No, she didn't have short hair or wear men's clothing. It was more about her behavior, too loud, too simple. She spoke her mind directly, never softening her words. And then there were those jokes. Oh, the jokes. They were atrocious. In their family, humor had always been kept to a minimum. When Tom had shown his mother the trick with the disappearing finger in 1st grade, he had received a lecture that lasted an hour and a half on the importance of propriety and restraint. He came from a respectable family, not some circus act. From the start, he needed to learn how to behave properly. Otherwise, he would never achieve recognition or find his place in the world. And the upbringing had paid off. Tom understood that loud laughter was inappropriate. Polite smiles were the way to go. The best sign of intelligence was a well-timed compliment or, better yet, silence. And then, this. The first time it happened was during a video call. At that point, Samantha had yet to meet Charlotte, but was planning a weekend visit. She called her son with a question, forgetting he was in the dorm kitchen, which was quite noisy. "Hey, pass me the can opener," someone shouted over Tom's head. A female voice replied, "You can't use your hands." "Tom here, try opening it or we'll ruin the lid with the can opener, and then we won't be able to close the jar properly," she said. "I can't," Tom replied after a few unsuccessful attempts. You can tell who has girlfriends. Your hands are out of practice, especially the left one. A male voice chimed in from somewhere off-screen. Before Tom could respond, Charlotte snapped back, "Be jealous, John. You won't have girls for a long time. At least, not until you learn that deodorant is for after showers, not as a substitute." Samantha struggled to keep her nervous trembling in check throughout the entire conversation. Was this really the crowd her son surrounded himself with every day? He should have been sent to the philology department. or perhaps philosophy. Anything but this den of mischief that could ruin young lives. The realization that this God forgive me 1.5 liter was her son's choice sent a chill down her spine. The uncouth daughter of a builder and a cashier had led Tom astray, causing him to lose all semblance of manners and his former self. Girl, as I understand it, there's no point in discussing classical literature with you, she said, trying to sound composed. Depends on which one, Charlotte replied casually. Of course, I'm referring to the great figures of Russian literature, Lev Nikolaevich Tolstoy, Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky, Nikolai Mikhailovich Karamzin. Samantha trailed off as she noticed the blatant boredom in Charlotte's eyes. No, I don't read that stuff, Charlotte winced. Ever since school, I've been sick of all those, oh poor unfortunate me, what should I do? One has a thicker pod, the other one is longer. I can't choose, so I'll go drown myself. Towards the end of Charlotte's tirade, Samantha heard strange grunting sounds to her right. With horror, she turned to her husband, James, a philologist with a scientific degree, who could hardly contain his laughter. But he read something right, he asked, attempting to keep a straight face. Jules Verne, Mayne Reid, Jack London. Of the Russian classics, I like Prishvin, Bashov, Zashenko. Ostrovsky has some good stuff. Chekhov is so-so. Some works are great, while others are not. Bulgakov is gorgeous. Egyptian Darkness from Notes of a Young Doctor is a really cool piece. I woke up my ancestors with laughter when I first read it at 12. Samantha listened in horror. She couldn't believe it, calling great works by renowned authors cool pieces. Talking about them like they were mere entertainment for this girl. And to say she didn't like certain classics? What a nightmare. How had Tom ended up with this asterisk? Feeling overwhelmed, she mumbled something about a headache and hurried out of the living room, leaving the guest in the care of her son and husband. It was a rude move, but she could no longer endure the scene. As she left, she caught snippets of the discussion devolving into critiques of Van Gogh and Pablo Picasso. But Ayvazovsky is amazing. It's incredible how he paints the sea so vividly that you feel seasick, like you're right there, and the battle scenes are just epic, like Mercury attacked by 2 French ships Once in the bedroom, with a cold compress on her forehead, Samantha tried to drown out the echoes of laughter from her husband, son, and Charlotte. An argument erupted, but it quickly subsided. Exhausted, she fell asleep without realizing it. When she finally awoke, she found her husband lying beside her. That horrible creature, has she left already? She asked, her voice trembling. Charlotte? My God, Samantha, what prejudice do you have against her? She's wonderful. With my extensive experience at the university and the many young people I've met, I can confidently say I've encountered a maximum of 10 such bright minds. A bright mind? This? My God, how terrifying. Telling herself not to panic, Samantha tried to push the horror her son had brought into their home out of her mind. Perhaps she could be lucky, and this girl would lose interest in Tom. The interest persisted. They eventually married, a disaster, an absolute disaster. Samantha cried, begged, and even threatened her son with dire consequences for her fragile health. But for the first time in his life, Tom rebelled. It was a horror, a catastrophe, the end of the world. Now, sitting in her son's home, she was forced to witness this monstrous squabble filled with what would be deemed insults in any polite society. Samantha, is everything okay? Her husband whispered, concern etched on his face. She nodded, struggling to hold back her tears. A month had passed since the wedding. Tom and Charlotte had just returned from their honeymoon and were now busy preparing for their final year of studies. Oh, those studies! Samantha remembered how devastated she had been when she learned that Tom had found a job. The poor boy was stuck working as some kind of freelancer to fund his wife's whims. She chose to ignore her husband's comments about Charlotte working in a similar capacity. She knew all too well what that job entailed, sitting at a computer and doing nothing productive. Everything about this rented apartment was terrible. It was definitely time for her to take matters into her own hands. Determined, she decided to intervene that very first weekend. With Tom and his father off to the construction market on business, she seized the opportunity to address her daughter-in-law's upbringing, or at least try to. As it turned out, it was nearly impossible. "Charlotte," she began, adopting her strictest tone. "First of all, we need to discuss your diet. As a woman, you're responsible for the quality and nutritional value of the food you prepare. And I must say, please don't take this the wrong way. You're doing a terrible job. That fried nightmare you served during our last visit had a detrimental effect on—" "Stop whining, okay?" Charlotte interrupted her. "Excuse me?" Samantha was momentarily at a loss for words, stunned by such blatant rudeness. She struggled to find a response when Charlotte continued. "First of all, if you don't like my cooking, you don't have to eat it. I'm not forcing anyone to have it. Tom enjoys it, and so do I, and I'm not asking for your opinion. Secondly, we don't live with you, so I'm under no obligation to cater to your tastes. The only person I will negotiate with is Tom. As long as he's happy with what I cook, I see no reason to change anything. Would you like some tea, or are you leaving already?" Samantha nearly bolted for home. The nerve of that girl! How dare she speak to her like that? Such disrespect! What kind of person was this? It was as if she had never been taught manners. Oh well, Samantha vowed to get even. She would show her. The next day, she invited Tom and Charlotte over and began to put her plan into action. However, complications arose when she realized that Charlotte didn't carry a purse or clutch as any respectable lady would. Samantha knew better than to try and use her jacket as a prop, given that the girl had her hands stuffed in her pockets too often. So the following evening, she dropped by Tom and Charlotte's apartment. She managed to implement her plan right away, but for appearance's sake, she had to sit through a cup of tea served in terrible half-liter mugs, adorned with silly pictures instead of proper cups. The only silver lining was that her son would soon move out of this collective farmer's dream apartment as soon as she executed her plan. "Thief!" she exclaimed, bursting into Tom and Samantha's apartment a couple of hours later. Channeling all her acting skills, she pounced on Charlotte with accusations. "In my own home, my things. Mom, what happened?" Tom asked, startled. "Your so-called wife robbed me. The necklace is gone, the one I received from my mother. It's a treasured piece, not an antique, but it's clear why Charlotte would want to profit from it. But I didn't take anything from you. If you don't believe me, search the place. Go ahead." Charlotte's voice trembled as she barely held back tears. This wasn't like her at all, but Samantha didn't care about Charlotte's unfolding hysteria. The priority was to carry out her plan. "I will search," Samantha declared, yanking open the nightstand drawer. Empty. She checked the shelf above the shoe rack, also vacant. Finally, she opened the fourth or fifth drawer, and there it was, the jewelry she had left just the day before. "Here it is, just as I said, a thief." She took it and— "I don't—" Charlotte, who had gone pale, suddenly shut her eyes and began to sway. In an instant, Tom scooped her into his arms and carried her into the living room. Samantha stood frozen in the hallway, necklace in hand, listening in confusion as her son frantically called for an ambulance, his voice trembling as he relayed all the necessary details. She hadn't anticipated such a reaction, but perhaps it was for the best? The girl appeared genuinely distressed about being caught. Given the sentences associated with theft, her anxiety was understandable. "Get out of here," Tom hissed at her. "Son, why are you acting like this?" Instead of responding, he pointed upwards. Following his gaze, Samantha noticed a surveillance camera perched in the corner above. I knew your rotten nature wouldn't let you sit quietly. All your little antics with the necklace were captured in high definition. Pray that Charlotte is okay. Tom practically shouted the last part. Ignoring her attempts to explain, he shoved his mother out of the apartment and slammed the door. This wasn't the outcome Samantha had envisioned. Now, she couldn't prove that her intentions had been good. It was all Charlotte's fault. If the girl hadn't shown her true colors, she wouldn't have felt the need to take such drastic measures. The daughter of the proletariat had invaded their normal family life, and now she was impossible to dislodge. When Samantha returned home, her husband awaited her with an unusually stern expression. Before she could utter a word, he stated, "Pack your things. You have 3 hours to leave this apartment. I'm filing for divorce." James had inherited the apartment from his parents, and Samantha was registered there, but what about the tenants? They still have 3 months left on their lease. You'll move into the rented apartment. I don't want to see you again. There were screams, pleas, and threats, but James remained impervious to his almost ex-wife's words. 3 hours later, Samantha found herself leaving the home she once knew. Thankfully, they managed to secure a cargo taxi. As she watched burly movers load her suitcases and treasured dressing table into the vehicle, she struggled to hold back tears. That wretched Charlotte. Before she arrived, everything had been fine. Now, she was completely alone. After managing to calm herself, James took a deep breath and approached the familiar door of the apartment his son and his wife rented. He stood there for nearly 3 minutes, gathering the courage to ring the doorbell. "I'm filing for divorce," he blurted out as the door cracked open. Tom stood in the doorway, while Charlotte, inexplicably cheerful, stood behind him, her arms draped around his shoulder. "Relax, Grandpa," Charlotte snickered. "Nobody's accusing you of anything. Come in. There's no need to set up forced ventilation here." "Why am I, Grandpa?" James retorted, indignant. A thought struck him. "Wait, how long?" 6 weeks. The doctors suspected I collapsed not so much from excitement, but from the presence of a little one, so to speak. The specialists were practically prophetic. They took me to the hospital and drew blood for various tests. Vampires of Central Russia, just taking blood from people. "Not a word to her," Tom said quietly, and James nodded in agreement. There was no need for Charlotte to be exposed to any negativity from Samantha. The path ahead for this family would be long and challenging as they welcomed their new member. But undoubtedly, in a healthy atmosphere and free from Samantha's constant grumbling, they would fare much better without her involvement. The mother-in-law had overplayed her hand. She had aimed to rid herself of her daughter-in-law, but ended up losing both her son and her husband.